Hi everyone, I hope you're keeping well. I am doing something that's a bit extraordinary and potentially something that's a bit unexpected, and maybe by many people something that's undesirable. Um, the reason that I'm sending you this video is that, well, hopefully for those of you who've been taught by me, you're aware that my approach to teaching you is not just about fulfilling the needs of a job. I hope that you have appreciated and you have seen that my teaching comes from a very deep-seated passion and passion that I have and a vehement belief in the importance of the things that we're trying to learn together. For that reason, I'm going to this extraordinary length to try to do a bit of teaching outside of term. This is something that I'm not required to do. This is not part of my job. And in fact, I think the university in many regards might be very displeased if they were to be aware of this effort that I've gone to. I wanted to engage with you and to send you a video with regard to the current public health crisis that we're facing. I mean, for me, this is a fundamental part of the global sustainable development agenda. This speaks to the SDG of health for all, as well as a multitude of other issues such as inequality, poverty, etc., etc. The message, and I guess the teaching objective that I have is to try to overcome a very unhelpful tendency that I think we have in society at the moment, and that's to maybe misinterpret and misconceive the issues that we're facing. I believe that there's a rather unhelpful narrative at the moment out there that conceives that we are, as a society, torn between two polarized possibilities. One, this idea of total lockdown as a response to the epidemic in the UK and in wider geographies, and a kind of attitude of not really doing very much. Now, my personal view is that the UK government, their initial response was too slow and it was insufficient. For me, this was always very obvious from the beginning. We could see the evidence of what was unfolding in other parts of the world. There was no reason to believe the UK was going to be any different, that we had any special powers to experience this epidemic differently. The government, of course, was concerned with balancing economic interests, which are beyond the sort of abstract conception. Economic interests are about people's incomes, people's jobs, people's ability to buy food and to pay their mortgages and to be financially stable. So we can't underestimate the importance of that. But of course, they were caught between that and the concerns for human health, and of course the expectation that large numbers of people potentially would be killed by the Covid-19 virus. So this wasn't an easy thing to be facing, but I think nevertheless it was obvious from the very beginning, and it's certainly obvious now that the response was inadequate. It was too slow and it was insufficient. It was also probably structured around extremes and lacked nuance. Now, to be fair, I think they face a difficult situation. A government legislating for the very complex, enriched lived realities of everyone's life in a country is very hard. Nevertheless, I think it's fair to say they got it very, very wrong, and as a consequence, more people died than was necessarily needed to be the case. As you will be aware, we then verged to a situation where it was recognised the severity of the situation, finally the realities were admitted to, and we moved from an inadequate situation to one that was very constrained. We've all been through experiences of lockdown. And that experience has had a huge negative impact on a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So that in itself is very problematic. The government then, as we've controlled the virus and as fatalities dropped, the government then sought to liberalise the restrictions. But I think what we've failed to do as a society and what the government has failed to do is to think about the first principles of what was going on. We were aware that the medical support in terms of development of vaccine, track and trace, etc., were not yet sufficient or not yet where we wanted it to be. There were all sorts of other things missing. The government's approach was to try to liberate, I think, as fast as possible, because of their concern for an economy, which, as I say, is of course important. The result of that complex and messy situation, and what I would say is the manifest inadequacy of government policy, is that we are now seeing that instances of the disease the virus are again increasing. You will have seen from the government's own chief scientific and medical advisors that they are suggesting that if the infection rate continues to rise, with it will follow hospitalizations, and with that will follow more human fatalities. We know, and this should be important to us as practitioners and scholars of sustainable development, where we believe in equality of opportunity, that we are not all in the same boat in the sense of the outcome, that these fatalities will be borne in particular parts of our society by those people who are vulnerable. And I would suggest that they are vulnerable for structural reasons that have driven lack of health and lack of resilient health. So because people are overweight, because people have other diseases and underlying health factors that are a product of our society. Of course, there are uncontrollable factors, so people's age plays into it, and that's something that technology yet can't address. And there are other kind of genetically driven vulnerabilities, but nevertheless, we're aware of this impact will be unequal across society. From what the scientific advisors, the government's own scientific advisors have suggested, and I think this is an important point to labour, because these people throughout their work for the government are torn between any kind of professional view they might have, and also the needs of the people that they work for. It's impossible to say where that balance has ultimately fallen, but we have to, as critical thinkers, recognise that. So when they come out and say these things, I think we need to take it very seriously. I think we now face a situation in which we need to think very carefully as a society. I'm again unconvinced by the propriety of the government response, and I think it's time for us to think as individuals. And I think it's particularly time for us as privileged individuals who basically spend our lives thinking about issues of global sustainable development to take particular initiative in this area. And what I want to, which is why I'm spending my morning making this video, I think it's helpful to think about things as maybe a graph with two axes that form a cross. So on the vertical axis, we need to think about what functions and activities in society are absolutely necessary. So down at the bottom, we've got things that are absolutely unnecessary, and at the top, we've got things that are absolutely necessary. And just to illustrate that, for example, thinking about the balance, it seems very inappropriate to say that a lockdown should mean that there's no medical support for anything else, because we want to control virus vectors. That, of course, would be the wrong balance. So many types of medical support are going to be higher on that axis. And we can distribute everything along that axis based upon the huge complexities of the world. So down at the bottom are things that are very much based upon personal desires that are not fundamental needs in any way. Hopefully you recall from the environmental principles module, I presented you the idea that sustainable development will require a consideration of foregoing certain freedoms in order to retain other freedoms, both individually and collectively. And we normally think about that on quite a long intergenerational timescale around climate change. But I think the same principle applies now. So for me, it's really important that all individuals in society now start to make very careful decisions about the things that they can forego with, in all honesty and self-reflection, very little cost. So I don't desperately need to go to the gym quite as much. I don't desperately need to go to restaurants where the individual managers of those restaurants have not taken appropriate precaution. I can make choices, and if I feel that it's appropriate, I can forego those activities. So that's our vertical axis of absolute need. We can then introduce an extra axis, a horizontal axis, And on the one side, we can classify activities that need to be done face-to-face, because otherwise they're not possible, or the value of doing them becomes so depleted. And on the other end of the axis, we have activities that can very easily be done not face-to-face, in other ways, in socially distanced ways, both in the sort of immediate sense, but then also in the large sense. And this is, I think, if we apply this axis, we as individuals and therefore collectively can start to understand what it is that we think is appropriate to be doing at this time, and what it is that we think isn't appropriate to be doing at this time. We don't, I think, have to wait, and we shouldn't wait for governments to set rules to tell us what to do. And I think part of my reason for saying this is that a lot of the rules they've set have been unfit for purpose. They've failed to appreciate first principles, and they've been too, I guess, politically invested. And I'll give you one simple example. It's up until recently, while consumers in shops were required to wear masks, people working in shops were not required to wear masks. Now, this entirely and totally and utterly defied any kind of foundational scientific understanding of how viruses work. You don't need to be an expert to understand that the act of not having a mask increases the possibility for virus vectors. And the idea that because you worked in a shop, this somehow violated the scientific principle is utterly ridiculous. So therefore, I've never taken the view that just simply following the rules is the right thing to do. It's for us as critical people to think actively about those rules. Hopefully, the rules that are there, we're willing to accept the mutual coercion of, again, to arc back to environmental principles, and agree that they're good and we're prepared to follow them. In other cases, I think we should take the view that actually, even though there isn't a rule, because we have a deeper understanding, we can behave in ways that improve upon that situation. So this brings me on to, I guess, my major point, and something that concerns us all at the moment. And this is the propriety of returning to university, and the propriety of returning to a university that has expressly said that what it does is face-to-face teaching. It's certainly true that the university has worked incredibly hard to put into place local social distancing measures, and to take steps that reduce the possibility and the risk of vectors being created. But of course, we can see from very obvious empirical evidence that even where institutions do the absolute best they can, this doesn't contain the spread of the Covid-19 virus. We can see in the United States that there are now tens of thousands, I forget the statistic, I think it might be 80,000 cases of positive cases in US universities. You might not have seen it, but it's not secret news. It's published in the Bore that already at the University of Warwick, before we've started face-to-face teaching proper with thousands and thousands of students creating new households and new vectors, there have already been positive tests of students on campus. Of course, the university has responded to that, but nevertheless, we can see what happens when we return to live and to work in a concentrated space. Going back to my two axes, I would say that for me, it is not appropriate for us to be foregoing the activities that a university performs. It's not appropriate for us to be entirely locking down and excluding a whole generation from their tertiary education. But for me, the question is whether we think it is acceptable to be doing that in a face-to-face way, or whether we as a collective society and as individuals take the view that actually, because we can do that, not face-to-face and through 100%, well, let me say, maximizing the online learning opportunities as opposed to trying to maximize the face-to-face learning opportunities. And myself as a teaching professional working in the area of the social sciences, I'm 100%, well, no, let's be philosophically sophisticated. I'm 99% certain that we can deliver for you a learning experience that is of equal quality, and that you will be incredibly pleased with. So for me as an individual, it is beyond discussion that we do not need to have face-to-face contact. As I said at the beginning, making this video is a choice that steps well beyond my my job role as defined by the university, and as a result of my kind of deeper vocation as an academic and as a teacher. This means that I'm expressing a view that is very counter to the university's position. The university would be fairly unhappy, I think, if they were to know that I'd communicated with you and said these things. And I think, to be transparent with you, I'm probably exposing myself to a little bit of risk by doing this, quite a lot of risk. Therefore, I guess I would very much appreciate if you would take the information from this video and use it to reflect and to develop your personal thinking on these matters, without really maybe telling anyone that you've seen it. However, of course, you're individuals and you should make your own critically evaluated choices about everything. So I kind of I think I've got to the end of what I wanted to say to you. I really hope that the thoughts I've shared are appreciated as part of your learning and personal development, and also as part of what I know from an individual point of view is a very difficult time for us all to be facing as human beings. If anyone would like to ask me any questions of any type, if anyone would like to express any alternative views of any type, and to engage in discussion, because that's what we're supposed to do, I would be absolutely delighted. But for now, I hope that you found some interest in what I've had to say.